Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Saswati Basu from the podcast How to Be. Hey Saswati, thanks for speaking with me today.
Oh, thanks, Marv, for having me here. And it's good to know that you're Marv. So, yes.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind Martin or Marv's either way. There's a whole history behind the nickname, but we won't go there because we haven't got time. What got you initially into these sort of books that are almost life-helping, life-affirming, and basically how to get by in life?
I think because I'm also a student of it myself, I needed those books when I was also in that place where you just need to read that kind of self-help type of things. I was in a funk during the pandemic, as a lot of people were. And it just seemed like a really good thing to read, a positive thing to read at a time where everyone was feeling very down. And I was like, oh, actually, there's so many out there that actually maybe I might need to actually help in terms of trying to read them all and give some advice for people who want to reach out and find that kind of books. And because there are so many.
There are. And before any people watching the video feed of this think about it, do not strain your neck to see the books behind Saswati because they are her partner's books.
Yes, that's correct. They're all the arty photography books. So if you're into that stuff, that's all behind me. So you might see some stunning ones up there.
Might bring him on for some, if ever we discuss photography, but that's a weird discussion for a podcast, maybe.
Indeed. You never know. There's always space for something, isn't it?
That's true. So going from being a studier of these books, what made you decide then to think, do you know what? I want to talk to the people who write these books and then base episodes of podcasts on those discussions.
The thing is that my background's in journalism. So I've been in the media field for almost 20 years now. And during that period of time when I started the podcast, I was working in a very strange environment because I was working with counterterrorism and artificial intelligence away from the media environment. And you can feel really detached and helpless when you're watching a lot of sort of terrible things happening in the world. And I was wanting to reach out to people and talk to people directly again. And that's the part of media that I really enjoy, which is doing these kind of discussions and things like that. And I was like, okay, why don't I reach out to the people who are writing the books? Because what better than to hear from straight from the horse's mouth why they had those motivations to write that book as well. And actually having the insight might help someone else going through something similar. So that's why it came about where I was just like, actually, I should reach out to the people writing the books because I bet you there's so much more behind each book that they're writing. So yeah, that's how it came about.
That's interesting. I'm going to go into a tangent here because when I started this podcast, I was still working through the lockdown that we had in the UK, but the job that I do is very solitary. And there was no way you couldn't go and visit anybody because of the restrictions of the lockdown, unless you're a member of parliament, of course, and then you can do. Least said about that, Mr. Hancock. And so maybe in a way, maybe me starting my podcast was a way of me trying to get that almost human interaction in a sense with people, maybe through that way, because all I was doing was listening to podcasts at work in the van driving around. And maybe I just thought, oh, maybe I could make friends with these people or chat with these people and find out what it is that makes them tick.
It sounds it seems totally logical because I think a lot of people started pandemic podcasts, probably for the same reason, that isolation, the loneliness, the disconnection from one another. And it makes total sense that suddenly you do want your voice to be heard somewhere, not just everything is so quiet during that period, wasn't it? It was so strange. But I think it makes total sense that you, like many other people, like myself, all started at that time as well, trying to make those kind of connections.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. So you've started the podcast. Was there any initial trouble with starting the podcast?
There is a fundamental problem. I am petrified of public speaking. That's how it started. So basically, it was aversion therapy to force myself into speaking.
Yep.
So what I did, so the first episode, which you'll hear is a total mess, is done line by line, recorded line by line on my phone because I was hyperventilating between each sentence, and then basically stitched together without all the breathing in between. So you'll see it was a learning curve. So definitely that was the biggest problem, I think, when you're starting, which was actually speaking.
I listened to that episode a long while ago, and I will say that it's not noticeable because you're very good at editing.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. That's one skill I've managed to keep from the media. But yes, it had to be done. Oh, it was very bad. Very bad. But yes, hopefully these days it's a bit more polished from the first episode. So
It's interesting because the way that you're doing it in with a lot of the episodes is that you're having these discussions with these writers, but it's not as what we're doing here. It's not like a show that's made up completely of the discussion between you and the author. It's a discussion between you and the author, and then you go out of that discussion and you go behind the scenes essentially of what the book or the writing is about, the history of the person, such as the one I listened to the other night with the person who lost her husband. And the book was
yeah.
based on that, essentially. And you went into the whole psychology of it and where she was coming from. And you kept going back and forth between that. And I think you had a conversation with somebody else as well in there, thrown in.
Yeah.
And it was, so it's not just almost like us doing Parkinson or a chat show. It's more than that. It's that with these little bits in, because you're introducing people to who the writer is and what her writing is about or their writing is about.
Yeah, this was really important for me because I realized that there's so many great interviewing podcasts out there already. And I was like, what can I add to this field, which is actually reading the books and then feeding back the information from each of the books so that people can make informed decisions about reading those books. Because in the end, they think, oh, maybe that's actually quite an interesting read. I might go and read that book myself. And so what I do is I completely summarize everything that's been read and put into, like, essentially researched and put together in a way that's just more kind of digestible. And then basically what I realize is that because every episode is themed, to put it out to the wider public about their thoughts on each subject, because I believe everyone has a place and a voice to and an experience in every subject. So it's good to have a sort of a different experiences and points of views within a episode so that we're not just having this kind of one tunnel vision with this is what we think and therefore you must agree with us. It's more about everyone has a point of view that's worth listening to. And especially in such a polarized world, it's really important that we have quite diverse thinking and diverse sort of conversations, which is why suddenly you'll get another person speaking about their point of view, and it might be completely different. And that is the point.
So long as people stop arguing with each other, please.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we want to stop, which is everyone should be able to listen to each other without everyone shouting at each other. And that's what we've lost with things like social media. Unfortunately, there's just so much bandwagoning that we've lost the ability to have dialogue.
Yeah, I find that, especially with something such as Twitter, which for us is a necessary evil
Yeah.
because of what we do. We use
Yeah.
it for those purposes. But that has changed a lot since its original inception, because I remember
Yeah.
when I first started on Twitter, which is when it actually started, it was the sort of place where you go to for free discussion. And
Yeah.
there wasn't any of this negativity that's there that seems to have suddenly appeared over the last a few years, but even more so since a famous megalomaniac.
Yeah, completely. I agree with you because I was the same. I joined really early on. And it was fantastic to be able to follow people that you admire and just like the thinking and the thought processes that people were sharing. And this was also at a time where citizen journalism was really big. This was during Arab Spring. So it was really important to have those kind of on the ground reports coming on Twitter. And then very quickly it morphed because I think some actors, some parties saw an area where they could exploit the sort of citizen journalism that was going on. And therefore, suddenly we started seeing bot farms and things like that just appearing. And then obviously, there's been so much more widespread like interference now with those kind of social media platforms. And just recently, as you say, we've had all the content moderation being removed from these platforms. So
Yeah.
it's now just almost impossible to navigate without some form of like abuse on those platforms, unfortunately.
There's a really good documentary podcast that's come out about Elon Musk, by the way, if you're at all interested.
Yeah, which one?
That's on Musk with Walter Isaacson.
Oh,
It's a
yes, of course.
four-part
Yeah.
series, and it's not biased towards him in any way, but then again, neither is the biography that Walter
Yeah.
wrote about him either.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I was really interested in that because obviously there was so much controversy surrounding the book, Elon Musk, because obviously there were some parts that had to be rectified afterwards, but then basically it's still quite interesting because he wrote it from a very sort of journalistic, impartial point of view, unlike some of the other biographies we've read recently. So yeah, it was interesting to see that, and especially since Musk is basically always in the news now.
But also interesting that Musk has allowed these things in the book and it's authorized by him, but there's a lot of negative. In essence, he's okayed it for him to be shown. It's quite interesting, really, because I think it's the only time or one of the very few times that I know of where somebody has had a biography written about them that has all aspects, negative, positive, and in between. And he's just basically said, that's me, put it out there.
Yeah.
And it is really brave at the same time as being really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It was really, I think that's why I found it quite unusual that there was this sort of error that was made because obviously there was a bit of fact checking done and it turned out there was just this little bit where it wasn't completely correct. And obviously it got big coverage as a result of that, which was the Starlink relationship with Ukraine. And that's why it was unusual that came about because it had been authorized. So obviously there's just some level of discrepancy, I think, between the biographer and Musk. So it was a strange situation, I think, to follow that.
But still interesting. We've gone off on a tangent there about
Yeah.
there. So the research then is essentially reading the books and researching the individual authors as well.
Yes, definitely. The research behind each author is really important because even in an interview, like when you're interviewing someone, it's really useful to have that information behind who you're interviewing. And also when it comes to researching their book, it also puts things into context. It gives you a little bit more insight into maybe where they were when they were writing it. And so that research is really important. And it has to be in such a sort of, again, easy, comprehensible way for people to listen to. So I think that's a really key part of the process is just making sure those episodes are like up standard and basically easy to listen to.
Okay, then. So if we go pull the curtain away a little bit, so let's have a look at that episode that I was on about that I was talking about. So when you were approaching the subject of Tiffany's book, is it Tiffany Philippou or
Yeah.
Yep. When you were looking at the subject of her book, what was the way that you built then the episode? What was your actual research in detail? What did you actually do there?
So basically, I actually have a theme in mind before I start an episode. So, for example, she was talking about obviously a really traumatic, serious subject, which is grief, especially in relation to things like suicide. And so, this is especially during Christmas time, it's such a big issue in terms of we don't really hear much about male suicide, mental health. And so I went in with that like in mind that I really wanted to cover something on this, even though there's so much that could be said. So I just went in briefly with one angle in particular. So I looked for books where I thought, okay, this could be interesting. I did some research around it. And then I went ahead and read books about these subjects. And that's how I came across Tiffany's book. And it was really interesting because obviously she's young herself. And it wasn't her husband, it was her boyfriend, her
Okay.
university boyfriend.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of strange scenario to be in where you're not married to this person. You don't have, say, the years and years you have, say, with someone you've been married to, but you have that level of grief that no one can understand. So she'd been with him for 2 years, but it basically ruled her life for 10 years after that. And it changed the way she thought, her mental health patterns, everything was like defined by this moment. And it was so tragic. And I was like, this is something that so many people could relate to because processing grief is so different for everyone. And there's the way you act up and things like that. It might manifest in really bizarre ways. And it was such a good book in terms of it's called Totally Fine. And that is that's the general kind of consensus when people ask, oh, how are you doing in a situation like that? I'm fine.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to take that subject and just look further into it. And then the second book I looked at was obviously Joan Didion's book. Joan Didion, who is a veteran essayist and beautiful writer, talked about such a tragic loss of a sudden death of her husband as her daughter was dying. And so I thought these are really hard subjects to look at, but I think really important subjects, especially during a holiday period where people really start thinking about those things. So yeah, that's why I had that idea in mind before I went in.
That's great. So you've got the guest. Yeah. So then about getting the guest, did you just find them on social media and contact them, or were there other ways like literary agents and the like?
Yeah, so it really depends on the person. Some people have their own websites, and so you can contact them directly through their website. But a lot of authors will have literary agents, especially the bigger they are, the more kind of sort of representation they have. So it's a much longer process. Some people it's easy to get to, but others it can take months and months to organize those interviews. I've been really fortunate to speak to some amazing people. So obviously we spoke to a Nobel Peace Prize winner last year. And it took some time to organize that, but really determined to speak to her. And she was Iran's first female judge. So she was a very significant woman and she's in exile in London. She went through so much in terms of being imprisoned many times, having her entire family imprisoned. And so it takes time if you really want to get someone you really think will be good for your podcast. So it's worth putting the legwork in, I think.
You've mentioned another episode that I've listened to there.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Loved that episode. So you've done that. So do you actually have a set structure that you go into, that you work to for each episode as well?
Yeah, completely. It helps me because as I've mentioned, I have terrible anxiety when it comes to public speaking. So structures really help in terms of just managing how I do it. And also it just also saves time if you have a template. So I have a basic structure that every episode will work through, just an introduction, you hear other people's voices, the interview, and also then you go to the first book, second book, and then have the summary of each book. And so I think it's having that kind of structure is important because it also allows your listener to know what's going to happen each episode. So there's no like spanner in the works suddenly. So they know what to expect each episode. So that's why I kept that kind of formula all the way through for, gosh, over 100 episodes now. So yeah.
I do very similar as well, and hence the points that I follow there. I like to have a structure that I can fall
Yeah.
back on and make sure that I hit the points that we need to hit.
Exactly. It does make a big difference, especially with the interviewing side as well. Yeah.
I'd be too worried about going through the chat and thinking at the end, I'll be thinking, did I get every point that I needed to? I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah. It
Exactly.
would really
Exactly.
worry me.
Yeah, I agree. Because then there's the faff of, oh, having to go back and just being like, oh, can I ask you this? But then it's never the same if it's off the audio. So yeah.
Not exactly the same thing, but I had one once where I did an episode and I could only get hold of the guest for about 10 minutes at a time. because he fitted it in his lunch breaks.
Oh, wow.
Because
Gosh.
he makes his own films. He does his own podcast about films, but he also teaches film at college as well.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
So I fitted him in 10 minutes in his dinner break, I think during 6 dinner breaks, and had to piece it together from 10-minute
My God,
segments.
that's impressive. That's some good editing as well. If you have to edit up 6-10 minute segments, my
Yeah.
God. And have that
Exactly.
continuity, that flow when you're speaking to someone as well.
So essentially, we'd go to like question 1, 2, and 3, maybe. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll speak to you in a few days and we'll do 4, 5, and 6.
That's so strange. Gosh. Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that's impressive. If you can get back into the mindset as you're speaking, then that's great. Because otherwise you have to do the whole introduction again each time, which is quite difficult in 10 minutes.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
Structure, then recording and editing. So I'm guessing you do Zoom or something similar?
I use Zencaster. So for the first season, I used Zoom. And then I started to switch into Zencast. I found having the separate audio streams are really useful. And also just in terms of video editing and things like that, having the 2 separate videos are really useful for me. So I can edit them into a nice kind of template, essentially. So and I found the audio quality to have been a little bit better as well. So I'm like, it is not without its flaws, of course. There are many times where suddenly the server will just stop and just, oh God. But I always have Zoom as a backup, though, for everything, just in case it doesn't work.
I am planning on possibly going to Zencastr later, because the other 2 shows that I'm a part of, they use Zencastr. And like you said, having a clean feed with those is a lot better.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely helps, I think, just because I think Zoom is great for like especially when I started off, Zoom was really useful because it was easy to use and it's usually without any technical difficulties, which a lot of these other ones run into. But then when I finally switched, I could hear the clarity and see the clarity a bit better with Zencaster. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to make the switch. So yeah.
Recording and then editing. What do you use to edit?
So I have quite a few. So I'm quite old school still with Audacity because it's easy to use. But I run everything through an Adobe Audition.
Yeah.
And then also I use Adobe Podcast now, which I absolutely love. It is an absolute game changer for me because it's AI cleaning and it just does such an immaculate job. And I no longer have to use like guys to do the cleaning for me if it takes too long and I don't have enough time. Because I used to manually do the cleaning, which was a very long process. But now it's just a total game changer. It cleans it so quickly. So I was like, oh, this is fantastic. So yes, that's for the audio side, but I use Premiere Pro for the videos.
So I'm taking notes of what you've just told me there.
Oh, really? Yeah, Adobe Podcast. It's brilliant.
And the other one is Premiere. What's that?
Premiere Pro. So Adobe Premiere Pro. It's the video package they use.
Okay. That's going to be really interesting for people watching me leaning over and taking notes.
Yeah. No, that's great. I'm glad that's helping somewhat.
Have a look into them, see what I can do. If anyone's interested with Zencastr, one of the shows that we do, we get free Zencastr use because if you promote Zencastr, they offer you a free package.
My God, that's like the reason why I joined the Zencastr creator program, because I was like, yes, free Zencastr. That's great. So yeah, it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it doing it. But yeah, I agree with you.
Even if it's not free, everything that you've got on there, that's why I'm thinking of moving over to there, is because everything you've got on there, including all the additional editing aids, and that really helps a lot.
Definitely. And especially if you're not used to editing, then you really do need those kind of additional sort of support. I was quite lucky because obviously I used to edit at work. I had those kind of basic skills. So I'm not great, but I can do like the basics. And so it's just useful having those extra bits if they can do it as quickly as possible.
That's true. So we're recording, editing, and then you've got sound and logo. Sound, you've got some maybe musical clips in there as well, which where are they from? And then you've got that great logo as well.
Yeah, do you know, it's really funny. So the sound, this season in particular, I changed the sound. Because I ran into an issue where I'd had free sounds that I'd found, and then YouTube was flagging it as a copyright issue. So I was like, okay, I
Mm.
can't use that anymore. So I went to Fiverr and got someone to record me a new tune. And so it's completely like my tune now, which is, yeah, I think loads of people do that. And it just gives it a little bit of, I think, uniqueness in a way. And I'm a guitarist, so I asked for guitars. So that's partially why that is the music is what it is. And then the logo itself was something I designed because I was looking to color schemes as well, and I was realized that light yellow tends to be like a very positive color, and then I noticed that actually a lot of sort of tech and things like that tend to be blue, and so I wanted to some kind of like something to offset that constant blueness that we see. So I have this sort of slightly happy, cheerful, light yellow color for my logo. And then basically I was like, okay, if we're talking about how to be, then we're going to have some really simple logo where we can see someone thinking. And that's where the head with the dots came in, which is why there is an ellipses even in the name of the podcast.
That's great. That's great. You're right though. Having yellow is very positive, and it's like the smiling face picture emoji. That's yellow, which is happy.
Exactly, and I think that's it, the association with it, isn't it? I was like, "You've got to find the right hue of yellow because it could be really in your face otherwise." But I was like, "Go for a really calm, muted yellow. Should make people feel a little bit calm and positive and happy."
Well, the Vitalite adverts with the sun always used to make people smile.
Exactly, exactly,
Hey,
and
Sunny D, aging ourselves here.
I don't tell me about it.
I hate asking this next question because it's always one of those that's a bit loaded in a sense. Are there any episodes that stand out to you?
Oh, it's always tricky, isn't it? Because each episode's so different. Okay, the ones that I'm thinking of just recently, for no particular reason, but just sticks in my mind right now, is Dr. Catherine Mannix, who wrote the book With the End in Mind. She is one of the top palliative care specialists, and she talks about being honest and open about death. And it's such a sort of loaded subject for so many people. And no one wants to talk about death because people feel so uncomfortable around it, but it's inevitable for everyone. And so she was really honest about it, which I really liked because I asked her a question as one of my bonus questions, which was, what do you think of assisted dying? Because this is in Parliament, this is a very big topic. But she was really honest about it, and I liked her response. She is a doctor. Of course, she's taken the Hippocratic Oath, and this is all very important. But she said, if we don't have honest conversations about dying, then none of those debates mean a thing. She said, the basic thing is we need to start being comfortable with the idea of death before we even talk about, oh, shall we have assisted dying? And I was like, that's very true. And so she talks about death cafes and these fascinating kind of things that have transpired from these conversations. And so, yeah, so at the moment, that's been on my mind. But I've just been really fortunate to meet so many amazing people, I think, through this journey that it's so hard to pick one. But Borna Bell is one in particular from the first season.
Yep.
She's a journalist. Her husband unfortunately took his life, and she talks about basically learning to live outside of this, but she found strength in becoming a power builder, power wrestler, which I thought was fascinating because women very rarely talk about physical strength. There's a lot of talk about emotional strength, but we very rarely talk about how physically our bodies can be so strong. And especially if you think women are carrying like children, a baby in their stomach for 9 months and it's basically draining them of everything. But that's all we associate with women. And then we don't talk about all the later facts of life, so menopause and things like that. So she writes this amazing book called Stronger, and it really makes you think about the body. And so I found that really fascinating as well. But yeah, I've been, again, quite lucky to have so many sort of interesting conversations with so many interesting people. So it's hard to pick sometimes.
Yeah, I've got the same problem. If somebody asked me, I'd be thinking, "Oh God, how could I pick one or two episodes out of over 160 episodes
Yeah.
that I've done.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And everyone's so different as well. So it's just fascinating.
That's another one of the things that I like about it, is because we're both similar in that way as well, because my subject is different every week.
Yeah.
Every time I speak to somebody, it's a different subject. So it's tricky that way as well, but also interesting, because then we're talking about a different subject, which keeps it flowing essentially. It's getting my brain working, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same. It puts things into perspective as well, I find, just because sometimes you can get inside your head quite a lot, especially when you're, as you say, if you're a remote worker like I am as well, it's really easy to just fall into that, like I'm inside my head all the time. So it's really nice sometimes when you're working or talking with someone else and then suddenly they just take you somewhere else. So I find that really interesting.
I get more interested in subjects the more shows that I listen to as well. I'll listen to them, and it's a lot of the time, like yourself, because you're interested in the subject, I think that pulls the listener in more, because your interest in the subject shines through the way that you make the show, and you put yourself whole 100% into the show. I think a lot of the time it's the presenters that pull the people into that subject and make them more interesting, essentially.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because the thing is, I think that's what podcasts have done, really. It's really personalized that relationship where in the past you had the radio, you had TV and things like that, but podcasts is just like maybe one level more closer to the listener, because there are so many and each one is made with the listener in mind. So when you're listening, it's because you really want to be there. And so it's really interesting. You're right. It's so different to the other previous mediums. And I think you're right. You have to be really interested in your subject to put so much effort and so much heart into it, because it is a full-time job in itself.
It really is. So going from answering the question there about standout episodes, so what would be your go-to how-tos? I worded that nicely. So the books or such media that you like, or that have stood out to you, that you've really enjoyed reading, or yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that will always stick in my mind. Some classic ones is like James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is like really just a really good way to get your brain into sort of, okay, get into a habit. This is a really easy way of doing it. And so he puts it really nicely. So it's just so easy to digest without feeling really overwhelmed, which is what happens a lot when it comes to goal setting. So yeah, that's a really good one. But I find Susan Cain's books so wonderful, because she is an introvert, just like I am, just like so many podcasters are. And she just writes about the power of introversion, which I think is just beautiful. So she has the book Quiet, which is just wonderful, because it's like the quiet power of introverts. And the other thing she's written more recently is called Bittersweet, which is just utterly wonderful. She is a Leonard Cohen fan, just like I'm a Leonard Cohen fan. And she talks about the beauty in melancholia and the fact that we should actually embrace melancholia, which I think is just wonderful, because that's the kind of music I do like as well. Yeah, so there's a couple of books that will always stick in my mind as, okay, go-to books. It's totally worth reading. It will uplift you in some way or shape or form.
You're similar to me, but very different. My other half, Louise, doesn't like songs that are a bit sad and a bit morose. So, for instance, when I went to go and see Paul McCartney live in Birmingham a number of years ago now, number one, the tickets were expensive. But number two, she was saying things like, yeah, but Let It Be and Hey Jude are a bit sad, and I don't want to be listening to those songs.
Oh my God, are you kidding? Those are like classics. Oh God, your partner is the same as my partner, because he is the biggest like Mariah Carey fan and he loves Whitney Houston and Madonna, and I'm not at all. I'm more like, yeah, exactly. I like the beauty in melancholia as well.
Absolutely. That's why guitars just to the side of me, out of shot.
Oh, seriously, I've got my 6 guitars behind over there.
I've got 6 of them in a stand at the side of me, along with mandolins, ukuleles, bass guitars. There's a electronic keyboard to the right.
Electronic keyboard
There.
to my front.
And behind me are boxes with all sorts of percussion and some drums and all sorts of other things.
I got my cajon over there. So yeah, I've got all my instruments around.
My tambura is in the corner
Oh,
over
see,
there.
I've got a lot of instruments at my mother's house because we grew up with music. So there's a sitar, harmoniums, tablas, they're all there.
And I've got a sarangi in storage as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's such a lovely sound. Yeah. And again, melancholic sound.
Very.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Top tips. Have you got any top tips for people keeping the positivity?
Oh gosh, I know it's a tough time to keep positivity. It's very tough. But I think it's important to things like, I know it sounds so many platitudes and things like that, but it's really important to embrace the small pleasures and the small gratitudes every single day, even if it's so tiny. And because I think it builds up, because it's so easy to build up all the negative. That happens all the time. So every day, think of something positive that's happened. It's so important because it's so easy to fall into despair, especially now. And so that's one thing. And the other thing I think is really important is, if I can just remember what my train of thought is, I think, oh gosh, yes, my train of thought is starting to go. Completely
Have you got
lost
some
it.
water with you to drink?
Yeah, gosh, yeah, Jesus, I had it just in my mind just before. That's so annoying.
Have some water and take a moment.
Oh God, it's so annoying when this happens. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Service to others. Service to others is so important because, again, it's so easy to just become very solitary and think the world and you're alone and things are really bad. Helping someone else makes such a massive difference, just to even to yourself, to other people. And I think just the world will be a better place if we did more service for others. Yeah, that's really vital, I think.
That reminds me, and is this really blowing my own trumpet? I don't know, maybe not.
Oh, who
But
cares?
that with the service for other people, before Christmas, pulling away the curtain, money isn't 100% great, but before Christmas, we went into town because we went in for a couple of jabs for something. Or I went for a jab for something. And while we were in town, I noticed somebody selling the Christmas issue of Big Issue.
Ah, yeah.
Okay. So rather than actually buying the big issue itself, which is a bit big, and I thought, I'm not really going to read that so much,
Mm.
I noticed that it was cold that day and it wasn't particularly the nicest day at all. So instead, I walked up to the seller of the big issue. And for those abroad who don't know, the big issue is sold to make money for the homeless.
Mm.
Okay. So instead of that, I walked up to the person that was selling them and I said to them, what drink would you like? And got them the cup of tea that they asked for. Did they take sugar? Yeah, they took sugar as well and milk. Made sure that I had it exacting to what they'd asked for. So I bought her a hot drink, a large one as well. I think it was one of those larger ones about that size.
Yeah.
Almost like a travel mug.
Yeah.
And so I bought that and then surprised her as well because I bought cookies to go with it as well. Because my thinking there was the big issue is good and she does get a little bit of money from it. But in essence, I thought the hot drink and something to eat was probably more helpful to her, considering that she's been out there selling this magazine all day. And it was about 2:00 in the afternoon, I think. And I thought, if she's been out there for even 5-6 hours, she'll want a hot drink and something to eat as well.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. It's so important. And like, this is every year I try and do some level of fundraising. So basically last year, because I have a degenerative illness, so I have a form of MS. And so I can't hold pens or anything anymore. So I started finger painting, big paintings, big canvases, and I sold them all and basically raised that money for charity. For homelessness charity. And every year I try and do something like that. I'm really lucky because I'm on the board of lots of really great charities. So Wheels for Wellbeing, which is a disabled cycling charity. I'm also an ambassador for BEAT, which is the National Eating Disorder charity. And I'm also a UN Women delegate. I try do service to people. And I think one of the biggest things I'm doing now with the How to Be Books platform is I'm moving it in towards turning it into an actual platform and business so that I can hire disabled writers to start working and give remote work opportunities. Because I think at the moment, disabled people are being treated so terribly by the government. And so I want us to be part of our own solution, essentially. So that's really big. So I think it's great that those small things make a big difference to people.
Before anybody comes back to me about it and saying, "Oh, Marv, what are you doing? You should really be giving money to this." I have a monthly amount of money that comes out of my bank account for shelter, which is why I didn't get the big issue, because I'm already giving to shelter once a month anyway.
Brilliant. Shelter's great as well. So yeah, I think that's so important. Homelessness is it's just like catastrophic at the moment. So it's brilliant that it's a really important charity to support for sure.
Especially with the financial situation it is at the moment, the fact that everything is going up so exponentially is making homelessness an even bigger problem than it was before.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that we're all like a hop, skip, and a jump away from that situation. And so I think it's karma that if we don't support that, who's to say it won't happen to us? Which is I think a reality a lot of people don't want to face.
With all the bills going up and all the cost of living going up, and people's wages do not go up accordingly. No. It's terrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice would you give to people wanting to start their own podcast?
Oh, it's a commitment. That's the thing. I think people need to understand that if you want to do this properly, you really have to commit time to it. And so if you're going into it, be aware of the fact that it's going to take some time. And if you're really passionate about it, then yeah, invest the time into it. You don't need that many skills or anything to get into it. Anyone can do it. But I think it's all about time.
Absolutely. So what shows do you like to listen to yourself that are podcast?
Oh God, you're gonna just think this is ridiculous. I listen to so much true crime, it's ridiculous. So I listen to obviously the classics, Untold Story, Serial, all those ones, Laramie. But actually, I'm really interested in the Tortoise Media ones because they had some fascinating investigations, such as Sweet Bobby, which was about catfishing, which is utterly terrifying. And also the bizarre hoax one that they had, which I thought was really bizarre, but brilliant. And obviously now Sweet Bobby's been sold to, I think, Sky or Netflix. So it's actually going to become a documentary. It just shows the power of like really good storytelling as well. But then like I support all our indie podcasters as well. So I love our friend, The Comfortable Spot, which I adore because there's some great people on those platforms as well that's been interviewed. And then some of my other ones, which is How to Be a Better Person, is a good one. I still can't believe Kate Hanley does an episode a day, which I still think is absolutely insane. So she's done something like 4,000 episodes or something insane, which I was like, wow. I was like, I don't know how you're doing that. And then just in terms of book podcasts, there's just so many. Like NPR's just brilliant, New York Times. And then, of course, there's Zibby Books as well. So mums who don't have time to read is another one, which is a good one. So yeah, lots and lots of podcasts are on my list all the time.
Okay. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Marv. That was great.
Okay. Where can people find you and get hold of you, Saswati?
So the website is www.howtobe20.com. And then also I'm at all major social media platforms and all major podcasting platforms at How to Be 24/7. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc., even TikTok. There you go.
And for anybody listening, yes, I did miss that a bit at the end when I did the introduction, 24/7, which is what I meant to say. How to Be 24/7. That's the podcast.
It's a How to Be Books podcast, but it's unfortunately, it's unfortunately 24/7 on all the platforms because everything else had been taken.
We know how that is.
Yeah, definitely.
You can find pods like us on any streaming platform, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, anywhere really. And we can be found on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Threads, and contacted through podslikeus@gmail.com. I'm also getting into trouble because I'm not promoting that this show is now also available for people to watch on Roku. So there we go. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.